Good morning. There we go. On behalf of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Columbus, welcome to our lay-led Sunday service presented by our Atheist, Skeptics, and Humanist group. I'm Tom Balliol. My pronouns are he, him. Bringing you this morning's service also are Amber Scott, our Director of Religious Exploration, Amanda Hayes, our Justice Coordinator, our speakers, Brenda Penn, Alice Farina, Kathy Elkins, Anita Bucknam, and Marge Lind, and Karen Timmis. Karen is also providing music for the service. And of course, none of this would be possible without our amazing tech team. Let us begin our time together by acknowledging the land which holds us. Land once home to people of the Adena and Hopewell cultures, and later the Wyandotte, the Miami, the Seneca, and the Cayuga. Gathered here and online, may we be grateful, thoughtful, and humble. Now please rise as you are willing and able and join in our first song. This is hymn number 291 in the gray hymnal, if you have one of those. Die Gedanken sind frei, thoughts are free. If you are at home, feel free to sing out as loudly as you wish. If you are here in the worship center, I invite you to sing softly, sotto voce, sharing your love, but not your breath. We have an inspiring program today presented by our Atheist, Skeptics, and Humanist group. We will hear the words of famous women freethinkers from the book Women Without Superstition, No Gods, No Masters, compiled and edited by Annie Laurie Gaylor. Whether you are visiting us or have been calling First U your home for some time now, we are so glad that you are here. Please let us know that you are watching by filling out the sign-in form located in the chat box if you're at home. You can also scan the QR code on your screen to access the sign-in form, our order of service, our joys and sorrows form, and our donations page. If you are joining us from home, I invite you to bring your chalices closer so that we may kindle our flames together. Across the centuries, women have been told to put their light under a basket, keep in the background, and stay silent. Often, the authority of religion was used to enforce this cultural expectation. Traditions, even our own tradition, followed this path. Fortunately, this is not the way for you used today. Let us kindle our flame to illuminate the past from which we have emerged, and the path forward to equality for all and peace in our world. Our chalice is lit.
Good morning. I'm Amber Scott, your Director of Religious Exploration. I'm pleased this morning to see many of you again wearing yellow or blue or sunflowers to show our opposition to war and our wish for peace for the Ukrainian people and the world. It's very chilly today here in Columbus, Ohio. However, there are still activities for families with children happening during the worship service today outside on the SYC playground. After the story, you'll have the opportunity to join our other families outdoors if you are interested. But don't forget your coat and any other warm things that you can wear to make it a little less chilly. Our story today is called She Persisted: 13 American Women Who Changed the World, written by Chelsea Clinton and illustrated by Alexander Boisier. Sometimes, being a girl isn't easy. At some point, someone will probably tell you no, will tell you to be quiet, and may even tell you your dreams are impossible. Don't listen to them. These 13 American women certainly did not take that no for an answer. They persisted. Harriet Tubman was born a slave, and her story could have ended there. Instead, she persisted, escaping from slavery and becoming the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. She risked her life many times to lead countless slaves to freedom, including her family, friends, and strangers. Every person she led to freedom arrived safely. Harriet Tubman said, "I should fight for my liberty as long as my strength lasted." Once Helen Keller became blind and deaf as a toddler, few people thought she'd be able to learn to read, write, or speak. But she persisted. Helen learned how to do all three and not only became the first person with deaf blindness to graduate from college, but she used her story to help fight for more opportunities for people with disabilities in the United States and the world. Helen Keller said, "One can never consent to creep when one feels an impulse to soar." After her family fled poverty and the threat of violence in Ukraine for a new home in New York City, Clara Lemlich got a job working at a garment factory. She wrote that the factory's conditions made women into machines, and so she persisted, organizing picket lines and strikes that ultimately helped win better pay, shorter hours, and safer working conditions for thousands of workers, both men and women. Clara Lemlich said, "I am one of those who suffers from the abuses described here, and I move that we go on general strike." Nellie Bly became a reporter in part because a male writer had said that working women were a monstrosity, and she wanted to prove that women could do anything. At times, putting her safety at risk, she persisted throughout her career in exposing real monstrosities, pretending to be a sweatshop worker and a patient in a mental hospital to show how badly people were being treated. Nellie Bly said, "I have never written a word that did not come from my heart, and I never shall. Inspired from an early age by her brother's childhood illnesses, Virginia Apgar was determined to be a doctor long before many girls had such dreams. Even though she qualified to be a surgeon, the male head surgeon at her hospital discouraged her because she was a woman. Nevertheless, she persisted, becoming an anesthesiologist and creating the Apgar score to test a newborn baby's health, which hospitals all over the world still use today. Virginia Apgar said, "Nobody, but nobody is going to stop breathing on me." After Maria Tallchief's family moved to California, partly to support Maria's dreams of becoming a dancer, she was teased by students in school for her Native American heritage and later was encouraged to change her last name to something that sounded Russian, since many professional dancers at the time were from Russia. She persisted, ignoring all the taunting and poor advice, and went on to become the first great American prima ballerina. Maria Tallchief said, "It never occurred to me to say, it hurts to do that." As a 15-year-old riding a bus home in Montgomery, Alabama, Claudette Colvin was expected to give her seat to a white woman just because she was black. In her refusal to get up, she persisted in taking a stand for what's right, helping to inspire Rosa Parks to make the same choice 9 months later, an act many point to as starting the modern civil rights movement. Claudette Colvin said, "I knew then and I know now that when it comes to justice, there is no easy way to get it. You can't sugarcoat it. You have to take a stand and say, this is not right." When Ruby Bridges was in kindergarten, many schools across America, particularly in the South, still refused black students their equal right to an education. Ruby wouldn't be treated like a second-class student, and she persisted, walking for weeks past angry, hateful protesters to integrate an all-white elementary school in New Orleans. Ruby Bridges said, "That faithful walk to school began a journey, and we all must work together to continue moving forward." As the first woman to serve as both a U.S. representative and U.S. senator, Margaret Chase Smith could have let that fact alone be her legacy. I think maybe we're one slide ahead of where we actually are, just FYI. Instead, she persisted in championing women's rights and more opportunities for women in the military, standing up for free speech and supporting, all right. The head of NASA once noted, "We wouldn't have put a man on the moon without Margaret." Margaret Chase Smith said, "The right way is not always the popular and easy way. Standing for right when it is unpopular is a true test of moral character." Sally Ride always believed women could succeed in any math or science career. Although not everyone agreed, she persisted and she became the first American woman in space. But that wasn't enough for Sally. She traveled into space once more and then created science and engineering programs specifically for girls so she could help generations of young women achieve their dreams too, both on Earth and in outer space. Sally Ride said, "Young girls need to see role models in whatever careers they may choose, just so they can picture themselves doing those jobs someday. You can't be what you can't see." When, as a kid, Florence Griffith Joyner visited her father in the Mojave Desert, he would urge her to run faster and faster, as fast as a jackrabbit. Even when she had to leave college to support her family, she persisted in training on the track, went back to school, and got faster and faster. Her unbroken world records in the 100-meter and 200-meter sprints set at the 1988 Summer Olympics means she's still the fastest woman ever. Florence Griffith Joyner said, "When anyone tells me I can't do anything, I'm just not listening anymore." Oprah Winfrey's grandmother expected Oprah to follow in her footsteps and become a maid. Oprah knew, even as a little girl, that her dreams would take her somewhere else. She persisted in turning those dreams into her reality and became a media superstar, working in movies, books, magazines, theater, and most of all, television, where the Oprah Winfrey Show remains the highest-rated talk show of all time. Oprah Winfrey said, "The biggest adventure you can ever take is to live the life of your dreams." Watching fictional judges on television inspired Sonia Sotomayor to want to be a real-life judge when she grew up. She knew she'd have to speak English as well as she spoke Spanish, study hard in school, and manage her diabetes before she could one day wear a judge's robe with a gavel in hand. She persisted, eventually becoming a Supreme Court justice and the first ever Latina to sit on America's highest court. Sonia Sotomayor said, "I have never had to face anything that could overwhelm the native optimism and stubborn perseverance that I was blessed with." And so, if anyone ever tells you no, if anyone ever says your voice isn't important or your dreams are too big, remember these women. They persisted, and so should you. The end. While the women in this story were not specifically freethinkers, they each worked hard and improved the world for women everywhere. Later in the service, we will hear about more brilliant historical women who were also women beyond belief. As you contemplate today's service, I invite you to remember and honor the women who have made a difference in your life and our community. And thank them if you can. Families who would like to participate in outdoor Sunday school are now invited to head to the playground.
Good morning. I'm Amanda Hayes, and I serve as your Justice Coordinator. My pronouns are she, her. To participate in the caring meditation this morning, or to ask for pastoral or practical support with a difficulty in your life, now is the time to fill out the Joys and Sorrows form. You can find it by scanning the QR code on the screen, or by visiting firstUU-Columbus/Sunday. If we receive your joy or sorrow in the next few minutes, we'll read it aloud today during the caring meditation. Or complete the form anytime throughout the week to be shared next Sunday and to receive pastoral and caring support. Thank you.
Good morning. Why women freethinkers? We actually could call this Women Thinkers because it's really a celebration of women who decided to think for themselves. Moreover, they did not keep their thoughts to themselves, but let the world know what it is that they thought. And this was a very lonesome and courageous path for each of them. Their voices were often singular, without support of many people, and in fact, often ridiculed by other groups, including other women. That they continued to speak out deserves our admiration. The history of demeaning women and treating us simply as property is long and is often based on the writings in both the Old and the New Testament. In 1997, Annie Laurie Gaylor published a book entitled Women Without Superstition, No Gods, No Masters, which contains writings of 50 free-thinking women from the 19th and the 20th centuries. This is her definition of women freethinkers. Free thought means the use of reason in forming opinions about religion, rather than basing belief on faith, authority, or tradition. We have selected just a handful of these women to present today. We hope that hearing from them will bolster your own confidence to think for yourselves and be proud of the intelligent person you are. Be courageous.
Ruth Green was born in 1915 and grew up in a conventional Methodist family in a small Iowa town. She received a journalism degree from Texas Tech in 1935, married, and had 3 children. After suffering through a succession of cancer diagnoses, she had 37 radiation treatments. She took her own life in 1981. She had written A Born-Again Skeptic's Guide to the Bible in 1979, and a series of her columns, essays, letters, and speeches was published posthumously in 1982 as The Book of Ruth. She wrote, "You know, as we get older, we are sometimes afflicted with palsy, an uncontrollable shaking of the head. Age hasn't yet given me this malady, but I read the Bible, and I've been shaking my head ever since." Using this forbidding tome makes it possible to pull out justification for imposing your will on others simply by calling your will God's will. I can even use the Bible to forbid you to jog, practice law, take a census, or sleep on a downy pillow. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I encountered the taboos and make-believe of the Bible. By spending a few minutes with it, I experienced medievalism all over again, with its myths and bugaboos of our fearful ancestors. Virgin births, angry gods, human and animal sacrifices, angels, devils, spirits, ghosts, heavens and hells, signs and wonders, resurrections. Incidentally, I found 9 specific resurrections of the dead in the Bible, several ascensions, miracle workers by the number. I found that Jesus was not unique in any way. While reading the scriptures, I had to keep pinching myself to be sure that I existed. The Bible's language is so sexist that most of the time one is not conscious of the female sex. And most of the time that's probably just as well, since women are depicted as culprits and the disposable property of the male population. The double standard waves over every page. Sex is sinful, eunuchs and celibacy are praised as signs of holiness and purity. I am pleased as punch no longer to believe in a God who declares reason a sin, who will not choose many noble and great and wise things, but has chosen the base things of the world, the foolish things, the weak things, and the things which are not. A God who could choose his companions in eternity, but prefers Jerry Falwell and Tammy Baker over Albert Einstein and Marie Curie. I am no longer a fool for Christ's sake, and I have no more desire to be a sheep than to be a fool. Skepticism is the way to knowledge, and that is why I am proud to be a skeptic.
Mary Wollstonecraft. Yeah, she's the one who ran off with Percy Shelley and wrote Frankenstein at age 19. True, but today we're speaking of her esteemed mother, also Mary Wollstonecraft, a child of the Enlightenment, scourged as a hyena in petticoats for her modern views. Mary was the second of 7 children born in London in 1759, the daughter of a weaver who drank, spent an inheritance, and left his daughters to fend for themselves. Mary became a companion to a widow, did needlework, worked as a governess, and opened her own school. She expressed strong opinions against conventional religion, the ministry, astrology, the monarchy, many customs of the wealthy, and slavery. She championed the rights of women, children, and animals. She promoted the benefits of breastfeeding, early education, dress reform, rational parenting. She called for a national system of free coeducational primary day schools. Her 1792 book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, rebutted the accepted views of the day toward women by such authors as Rousseau, protested the circumscribed sphere of womankind and society's assumptions that women feel rather than think. Teach them to think, she said, and treat women as the rational creatures that they were. Women must only bow to the authority of reason instead of being the modest slaves of opinion. Mary devoted much of the last chapter of the book to exposing faith healers and fortune tellers. Although a sensation in its day, her book was not republished for a century. Here are some of the gems from it. Women's first duty is to themselves as rational creatures, and the next, in point of importance, as citizens. Every being may become virtuous by the exercise of its own reason. In fact, it is a farce to call any being virtuous whose virtues do not result from the exercise of its own reason. Strengthen the female mind by enlarging it, and there will be an end to blind obedience. A slavish bondage to parents cramps every faculty of the mind. Children cannot be taught too early to submit to reason. Slavery to monarchs and ministers, which the world will be long freeing itself from, and whose deadly grasp stops the progress of the human mind, is not yet abolished.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton, born 1815, was the first to call for women's suffrage in the United States. She devoted her life to freeing women not only from legal constraints, but also from superstition. She authored the very first text of the 19th Amendment guaranteeing the women the right to vote. In her day, she was more famous than Susan B. Anthony. Elizabeth was born in New York to a prosperous family, and her father was a lawyer. And when she heard the pathetic pleas from women clients in her father's office, she resolved to rid statutes of odious laws. At 24, she married Henry Stanton, a young abolitionist. On their honeymoon in 1840, they went to the World's Anti-Slavery Convention in London. There she suffered the humiliation of having women's status as delegates denied by male abolitionists. At 32, as a harried housewife and mother living in Seneca Falls, New York, she helped plan the historic First Women's Rights Convention, July 1848. Elizabeth called for women's suffrage to be part of the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments was considered shocking, but this plan not only won endorsement, but would galvanize women for the next 72 years. She edited a feminist newspaper, The Revolution, for 2.5 years, and lectured around the country 5 months out of the year for more than a decade. She wrote and edited 6 books and impatiently anticipated the reforms of 20th century feminism. She was the first woman to run for U.S. House of Representatives. She received 24 votes out of 22,000 cast. She was feted in grand style upon her 80th birthday in 1895 with an audience of 6,000 at the Metropolitan Opera House. And even at this event, she critiqued religion and said, "It is evident that our demands for equal recognition should now be made of the church that we have been making from the state for the last 50 years. Her belief, she said, was grounded in science, common sense, and love of humanity, not fears of the torments of hell or the joys of heaven. She preceded the Me Too movement when she spoke out publicly about the affair of Henry Ward Beecher, the father of Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Elizabeth Tilton. She was incensed when a church investigation ended up blaming Elizabeth Tilton for seducing him. In an 1896 article entitled "The Degraded Status of Women in the Bible," she wrote, "I have endeavored to dissipate these religious superstitions from the minds of women and base their faith on science and reason, where I found for myself that peace and comfort that I could not find in the church or the Bible. The less they believe, the better for their own happiness and development." For 50 years, the women of this nation have tried to dam up this deadly stream that poisons their lives, but thus far they have lacked the insight or courage to follow it back to its source and there strike the blow at the foundation of all tyranny: religious superstition, priestly power, and canon law. Remaining an activist as long as she was able, toward the conclusion of her life, she quipped, "I am most truly a Protestant, for I protest indifferently against all systems of religious belief."
Good morning. Charlotte Perkins Gilman was born in 1860. Her childhood was an unhappy one, and after a brief marriage that ended in 1887, she settled by herself in California and began her impressive career as a lecturer, journalist, and author. She had one daughter, whom she sent to live with her former husband and his wife, a fact that caused a great deal of consternation in the society of the time. Her writings were broad and varied in genre and addressed a broad range of issues. But virtually always, the full force of her writing and lecturing was focused on the uneven power relations between men and women, and the role of religion in promoting that status quo. One of her books that was very well known during her lifetime was entitled "His Religion and Hers." What, she asked, would have been the effect upon religion if it had come to us through the minds of women? While her thinking was very much influenced by evolutionary theory, she recognized, long before it was acceptable to do so, that the language chosen to explain Darwinism, using terms like survival of the fittest, was, in her terms, heavily masculinized. She found established religion similarly masculinized and wrote that religion should, instead, not be a set of given truths, but a system that expands and grows with the accumulation of new ideas and knowledge. Today, she is probably best known for her striking short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, a heartbreaking tale about a woman being treated for depression, the standard treatment being to isolate her completely so that her emotions could be normalized. The woman sees that pattern of the yellow wallpaper in the room where she is confined is in fact a kind of cage. Try to escape and you will either remain trapped or die. The story is a particularly effective way to illustrate in literature the entrapment of women in a world that leaves them utterly powerless, prisoners in both the literal and figurative senses. In her 1923 book, His Religion and Hers, The Two Beyonds, she says, "A mystery is not merely a thing you do not know. It is a thing you must not know, which it's wrong to think about. An odd idea, this, but child or savage takes easily to it, and the priesthood seized upon it as a wonderful protection for their imperfect thought." Still quoting, "Some religious theory or doctrine would be developed which was absurd enough to arouse comment and question. That would never do. So there grew up the wonderfully interlocking, self-protective structure of a great religion. Any of the great religions, they are all alike in this claim. Here is something more important than anything else. It must be believed. If you do not believe it, you will be punished." Still quoting, "Since it was apparent that believers in other religions were tolerably prosperous, the punishment was alleged to take place after death, when none could contradict. One wonders here whether our hideous hell idea was developed to meet the persecutions of Christianity. Since the torments inflicted upon people in this life were terrible beyond belief, it was necessary to think up something sufficiently worse to strengthen the martyr to endurance. And the fear of a hypothetical roasting in hell enabled men to endure very practical roasting in this. By the power of ideas over conduct, each religion maintains its hold. And since the hold is absolutely dependent upon the ideas, it becomes a sin to doubt them. The more patently absurd they may be, the more necessary it is that they be shrouded by mystery, guarded by sanctity. The enormous influence of religion upon conduct is obvious. Unfortunately, the conduct demanded was seldom of any value in promoting our happiness and progress, but mostly concerned those rites and ceremonies and those sacrifices, either in goods or money, essential to the maintenance of the established religion."
Queen Silver was born in 1910 during a trip her mother, Grace Silver, made to attend a meeting of the Socialist Party. Although Queen was clearly a precocious child, Grace preferred to believe that her own homeschooling methods were responsible for Queen's remarkable intellect. She had no use for the usual fairy tales and children's books. Instead, she read aloud to Queen whatever books she chose for herself, including her own speeches. Queen was speaking full sentences by age 3 and reading books by age 6. A year later, she began to give public lectures on topics like Darwin's theory of evolution and human nature in the animal world. She even challenged William Jennings Bryan to a debate on evolution. He declined. Cecil B. DeMille produced a movie called The Godless Girl, based on her delivering free thought literature to the Hollywood high school she attended. She supported herself with mundane jobs like typing, ultimately becoming a court reporter. But her passion was in being an activist. She founded Atheists United and was member of many freethinker organizations. In her 80s, she spoke to one such group, citing many examples of progress made by men and women who challenged conventional thinking, which was often based on biblical injunctions. Here are a few excerpts. "If that mindset always had been victorious, we would still be living in a world in which the earth had 4 corners, was orbited by the sun, and where heaven was 3 miles straight up. The greatest contribution non-believers have made to the world has been the Constitution of the United States. Consider how very heretical to the religious world was the idea of a constitution predicated on we the people with no reference to God at all." Another quote, "Unbelief is prominent in disease control. A thoroughly religious person in the Orthodox tradition believes disease is caused by God as a punishment for a sin. This mentality is still reflected today and used to be the prevailing attitude about disease in general. But skeptics, unwilling to accept the traditional wisdom of the time, realize this is not a curse from God. This is something we can cure. And finally, in the process of discovering how the facts of nature contradicted the dogmas of theology, some people were burnt. Some people were imprisoned. Some people simply became too scared to continue research or to speak out. We now benefit from the fact there were people who dared to investigate, dared to be curious.
We'll get on to part 2 in just a moment. But first, our March Share the Plate recipient is the Buckeye Environmental Network, a nonprofit organization committed to empowering grassroots organizations, individuals, and local communities to advocate for environmental justice. This could not be a timelier partnership, as this year's bread focus is also environmental justice. Your support is critical to not only redress the wrongs of the past, but to help our Columbus community, our nation, and people across the world recognize that this is our only home. Please use the QR code or go to our website, firstuucolumbus.org, and click on the Donate tab to share as you feel called and are able. Thank you for your generosity, for remember, there is no planet B.
Emma Goldman, often called the Red Atheist, was born in 1869. As a 17-year-old emigre from Russia's Jewish ghettos, she settled in Rochester, New York with her sister, taking a factory job paying $2.50 a week. In 1883, she was arrested and found guilty of inciting a riot for saying at a mass rally, "If they do not give you work, demand bread. If they deny you both, Take bread. It is your sacred right. She was further galvanized into activism by the 1887 Haymarket bombing and execution of 7 Chicago anarchists. After becoming a famed lecturer, she received an invitation in 1898 to speak at a Detroit pulpit. She was provoked into scandalizing the congregation by saying, "I do not believe in God because I believe in man. Whatever his mistakes, man has for thousands of years working to correct the botched job your God has made." She was greeted with cries of blasphemy, heretic, sinner. She continued, "There are some potentates I would kill. They are ignorance, superstition, and bigotry, the most sinister and tyrannical rulers of the earth." Emma became persona non grata in 1901 when a self-professed anarchist assassinated President William McKinley. He said he had attended one of her lectures. She went underground, but later was arrested and charged with conspiracy for obstructing the draft in 1917 and charged for setting up non-conscription leagues. She served 2 years in prison. At age 50, through the efforts of the U.S. Department of Justice and J. Edgar Hoover, she was deported to the Soviet Union. She said, "I considered an honor to be the first political agitator to be deported from the United States." But she left Russia very disillusioned with Bolshevism. She became a British citizen and died in Canada at age 70. Her body was returned to America and buried in Chicago's Waldheim Cemetery, where a monument stands to the Haymarket martyrs. Emma was an outspoken atheist, rebelling against what she called the burden of dead ideas. In an article entitled "The Failure of Christianity," published in her journal, Mother Earth, 1913, she says, "Everywhere and always since its very inception, Christianity has instilled fear of man, turning him into a dual being, whose life energies are spent in the struggle between body and soul, in decrying the body as something evil, the flesh as tempter to everything that is sinful. Man has mutilated his being in the vain attempt to keep his soul pure." The Christian religion extols the glory of the hereafter, and therefore remains indifferent to the horrors of the earth. Christianity is the conspiracy of ignorance against reason, of darkness against light, of submission and slavery against independence and freedom, of the denial of strength and beauty against the affirmation of the joy and glory of life. Her vitriol was not aimed only at Christianity. In The Philosophy of Atheism, written in 1916, she says, "Have not all theists painted their deity as the God of love and goodness? Yet, after thousands of years of such pronouncements, the gods remain deaf to the agony of the human race. Confucius cares not for the poverty, squalor, and misery of the people of China. Buddha remains undisturbed in his philosophical indifference to the famine and starvation of the Hindu. Jehovah continues deaf to the bitter cry of Israel, while Jesus refuses to rise from the dead against his Christians who are butchering each other."
Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was born in 1879 and began her activist life in 1914, the year her mother died at age 48 having borne 11 children. Sanger would work for the rest of her life to provide women, particularly poor women, with accessible, inexpensive, and safe birth control and maternal health care. She attended nursing school and worked as an obstetric nurse despite some serious health issues of her own. In 1912, she married William Sanger, and the family moved from upstate New York to New York City, where she became acquainted with a wide range of progressive thinkers like Emma Goldman. Let's see. I think I got this backwards there. Sorry. She began writing a weekly newspaper column entitled What Every Woman Should Know, and later, What Every Girl Should Know. All of her writings were condemned by the church for their frank discussions of sexuality. The last step in her radicalization came when Sadie Sachs, a 28-year-old mother of 3, nearly died from a self-induced abortion, prompting her doctor to tell her she could avoid another pregnancy by telling her husband to sleep on the roof. 3 months later, Sanger watched Sadie die from her second self-induced abortion. In 1914, Sanger began publishing a monthly newspaper entitled The Woman Rebel in order to attack the repressive Comstock laws of 1875, which defined, quote, the prevention of conception as, quote, obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, and indecent. She was indicted on 9 counts of violating the Comstock Act, and rather than face the likelihood of a 45-year prison sentence, she fled alone to England. Back in the United States, her husband was arrested for distributing Sanger's Family Limitation, a book outlawed by the Comstock Act. When H.G. Wells and many other prominent people petitioned President Wilson in her defense, the Sanger's case was widely publicized and the charges against them were dropped. Margaret lectured frequently, and with the help of a range of influential friends, she and her sister opened their Brooklyn Clinic for Women's Health. One patient told her that her priest had advised her to have lots of children. I had 15, she said. 6 are living. I'm 37 years old. Look at me. I might be 50. Well, I'm more than 50. But the clinic was raided, and Margaret spent 30 days in jail. With the support of a wide range of intellectuals, including Albert Einstein, H.G. Wells, and Bertrand Russell, as well as financial help from a wide range of supporters, she was able to promote or help open some 50 birth control clinics in the United States and 50 more in Europe. In 1939, with the help of public figures, including Eleanor Roosevelt and Einstein, she planned a world conference that resulted in organizing the International Planned Parenthood Federation. Margaret Sanger savored the victory she had long worked for when the U.S. Supreme Court, in Griswold v. Connecticut case of 1965, struck down any and all laws declaring contraceptives criminal. Margaret's desire for justice and equity had been nurtured by her own father's compassion, as well as her mother's untimely death. An anecdote from her autobiography perhaps explains the origins of both her disdain for those powerful men in religion and government and her overwhelming compassion for the powerless. Her father, quote, gave none of us much peace. When we put on stout shoes, he said, very nice, very comfortable. Do you know who made them? Why, yes, the shoemaker. We then had to listen to graphic descriptions of factory conditions in the shoe industry so that we might learn something of the misery and poverty the workers suffered in order to keep our feet warm and dry. His parting words to each of his sons and daughters who had grown old enough to fend for themselves were, quote, leave the world better because you, my child, have dwelt in it. This was something to live up to. And Margaret Sanger certainly did just that.
Anne Royal was born in Baltimore in 1769. An outspoken eccentric and defender of the Enlightenment, She was convicted at the behest of religionists of being a common scold in 1829. A South Carolina editor stated that Anne was actually an uncommon scold. After her husband died in 1813, Anne was left without any means except what she could earn by her pen. She set off on a series of nomadic adventures to Tennessee and Virginia, New York and New England, writing several travel books. Described as a small, frail scarecrow, she was intrepid, courageous, and outrageously free-spoken. She exposed malfeasance in public office, promoted public funding for scientific research, and editorialized on many of the issues of the day, including labor rights and the abolition of slavery. But the full measure of her scorn was aimed at missionaries and those who used missionaries to establish a national religion. She wrote, "From Maine to Georgia, from the Atlantic to Missouri, they swarm like locusts. And under the name of foreign missions, home missions, Bible missions, Sunday school societies, they have laid the whole country under contribution. Figures cannot calculate the amount collected by those public and private robbers. It is more than would liberate every slave in the United States. It would pay the British debt. They say, we do not force people to give, but I see no difference between forcing a man out of his money at the mouth of a pistol and forcing it from him by trick and cunning. Like a pestilence, they cover the land, not to scatter blessings among the distressed, root out ignorance, or ennoble the age, not to break the chains of slavery or cultivate the arts and sciences. No, quite the reverse. Their object and their interest is to plunge mankind into ignorance, to make him a bigot, a fanatic, to hate every sect but his own, to shut his eyes against the truth, harden his heart against the distress of his fellow man, and purchase heaven by money. They are preaching to the public to elect none but godly men to the legislature. As to godly men, I believe they are very scarce. But what they mean by godly people is people of their own stamp. They think to get these godly men into the general government, get 2/3 of the states to alter the Constitution, and then to establish their national religion and force the people to support it. May the arm of the first member of Congress who proposes a national religion drop powerless from his shoulder, his tongue cleave to the roof of his mouth, and all the people say, Amen. Amen.
Taslima Nasrin was born in 1962 in Bangladesh. Her parents were devout Muslims in the Sufi tradition. At that time, the rulings of mullahs overrode national law. For example, a fatwa could lead to stoning by death. Death by stoning, excuse me. Women were confined to their homes and had to be escorted into town by family males. Taslima became an atheist at the age of 11. Encouraged by her family, she became a physician. She also wrote poems and essays and had a syndicated column. Favorite subjects were atrocities against women, including evidence of domestic violence she saw regularly in her hospital work. A fatwa condemning her to death was issued in 1993 after publication of her novella, Shame. Fearing for her life, she escaped to Sweden in 1994. Here are some of her thoughts on religion. Religion is the great oppressor and should be abolished. The Quran, the Vedas, the Bible, and all such religious texts are just out of place and out of time. In a 1996 speech at Harvard University, she traced the rise and fall of Islam, once a leader in science and mathematics. The European imperialist thrust into North America, Asia, and Africa created vast empires. When the colonial powers left after the Cold War, or during the Cold War, the first leaders of majority Islamic states like Indonesia, Pakistan, and Egypt saw religion as a cultural nation-building tool, but did not support theocracy. Later, power passed into the hands of people who, she said, quote, declared their country an Islamic state in order to make themselves popular. Among ignorant masses, it is a useful tool for control. In the meantime, common people will have to suffer because of the activities of the fundamentalists. If only there was a faster economic growth process, unemployment, better access to education, I think the situation would be different if such miracles could happen. Democratic people will have to bear the brunt of fundamentalism in my country. Women will have to suffer not only discrimination, but also ignominy, and violence and human rights will remain just a dream for many. And she has some thoughts on Western culture. Personally, I believe in the plurality of cultures, and I have nothing against Western culture as such. But in the past, feeling of cultural superiority among the Western rulers were a constant irritant to the people of non-Western countries. When fundamentalism looms large, the West should be very careful in handling the culture of Asian, African, and Latin American peoples. There is no such thing as a superior or inferior culture. There are only various cultural patterns which make up this beautiful, multicolored mosaic. She often quoted from Bertrand Russell, and this was her favorite. The power of reason is thought small in these days, but I remain an unrepentant rationalist.
Susan H. Wixon was born in Massachusetts in 1839. As a child, she disagreed with an Orthodox Sunday school teacher over the idea of redemption, asserting that anyone who would make a lake of fire and brimstone into which to incinerate his children ought to be the first one burned in it. Her father reportedly had told her as a child, "Were you a boy, I would send you to college," thereby converting her to women's suffrage. Always head of her class as a student, Susan began teaching school at age 13. She became the first woman to lecture at Payne Hall in Boston on reform topics such as temperance, labor, and education, and traveled abroad to collect statistics on women's work and wages. She wrote verse and prose for the Free Thought Press. Her poem, When Womanhood Awakes, was widely cited among women's advocates of her day. She wrote at least 4 books, plus The Story Hour, the only illustrated free thought storybook for children in the 19th century. She says, canon laws established by the Christian Church in the 9th century and based upon the Bible are the root and cause of the subjugation and degradation of women in Christian countries. All the abuses, humiliations, cruelties, and indignities heaped upon women in Christian countries may be traced directly and squarely to this one source, the fable of original sin. In the year 581, a church council solemnly debated whether woman had a soul or not, whether she was a beast or a human being. And the more Christianity prevailed, the worse it was for woman. When the witchcraft frenzy broke out in Europe, women and girls were the principal victims. In Geneva, 500 women were executed within 3 months. In Germany, an estimated 100,000 victims lost their lives, while England sent 30,000 poor defenseless creatures to death on the charge of riding through the air on a broomstick. Our own colonial records bear testimony of frequent persecutions and executions of women for practicing witchery. In the face of a history replete with abuse, cruelty, and scorn for woman, the Christian Church still has the audacity and impudence to declare that it has been her friend. It has done everything for her elevation and advancement. Theology, the friend of women? When did Christianity, that boasts of being so friendly to woman, ever advocate her right to representation, her right to self-ownership? Never. There can never be any great moral progress until there is but one code of morality, and there is but one force that has brought about this code of morality and assisted woman to her rightful place: free thought. Call it liberalism, education. It is the one power which has broken the chains of woman and started her on the road to freedom. For free thought understands that woman's condition decides that of the race. Elevate her, and you lift the whole human family. Degrade her, and disgrace and shame become the lot of man.
Having listened to the words and stories of free-thinking women this morning, I invite you now to turn inward for our caring meditation. You, too, are a wonderful human being with so much to offer this world. What stories have you lived that others could learn from? What goals and ideals do you feel drawn to persist in? What ideas could you share? Maybe what you most need to offer the world is a listening ear. I believe you bring great joy and wonder into the world just by being yourself. No one can bring to the world what you bring in just the way you bring it. Let us give thanks for the gift of being exactly who we are. Let us give thanks for the examples of so many women who have powerfully and beautifully lived who they were and would not be made smaller or quieter by others' expectations. And let our thoughts, prayers, and goodwill continue to be with the people of Ukraine and all who suffer from violence. And now this morning's pastoral listeners will share our caring cards and joys and sorrows this morning.
Good morning. There are three cards in Beach Hall to celebrate three new members of the church. And so I encourage those who are here in the worship center to sign those cards as a greeting to our new members after the service. Also, there's sad news. Our Reverend Linda Smith is again in the hospital with back pain. She's hopeful that she can have a procedure soon that may resolve her pain. Linda appreciates the card that was sent from the congregation last week. She also appreciates the support she receives from her husband, Stuart, and from her children.
May we hold these joys and sorrows and those yet unspoken gently in our hearts. As I ring our temple bell, I invite you into a brief time of silence. Use this time to reflect, imagine, pray, or simply breathe in and out as you are in this beloved community. I'll ring the bell a second time as we continue our service. Now, today, we are commissioning our Bread Network members. One way our congregation fulfills our mission of creating community, working for justice, and engaging diversity is by working with other congregations through Bread. Now, Bread stands for Building Responsibility, Equality, and Dignity. Bread is a congregation-based community organization of many different religious congregations in Central Ohio. These congregations are united through Bread to research proven solutions and apply nonpartisan pressure on local decision makers to improve housing, healthcare, employment, education, and other poverty-related problems in Central Ohio. The Bread listening process can create community when we deeply engage with one another and get to know what concerns for healing our community lie heaviest on each other's hearts. Joining a Bread research team creates an opportunity to engage diversity as members of many faith communities in our city work together to find solutions. The whole process is a way of working for justice, and a vital part of the process is for Bread Network members to invite a huge turnout from the 44 member congregations to the Nehemiah Action. With the energy of thousands of people present, the work done during the whole rest of the year is empowered by the people. So I would like to ask those of our 64 Bread Network members who are present to rise as you are able and join together at the front of the stage. All right, I'd also ask if you're virtually present on the live stream, please type into the chat, "I am a Bread Network member." Everyone you see standing here, as well as some present virtually, are First UU's Bread Network members. This spring, they will be working for justice by reaching out to members of First UU and asking you to attend the Nehemiah Action on Tuesday, May 10. This will be our first action back at the Celeste Center since COVID, and we're excited to be able to gather safely in person. Bread staff is working to ensure a safe event, including requiring masks, social distancing, and potentially providing a drive-in option for those who medically need to remain isolated at this time. Our goal is that 300 First UUers, adults and children, would attend the Nehemiah Action, as many as normally attend Sunday service and RE during non-COVID times. So if one of these network members reaches out to you, I encourage you to attend. At the Nehemiah Action, you would be adding your voice to thousands of other voices to work for justice in our community. Now, as Justice Coordinator of the First Unitarian Universalist Church, I commission you as First UU's Bread Network members. May you be loving, persistent, courageous, and thoughtful as you reach out to invite your fellow First UUers to join the Nehemiah Action. Thank you for your work for justice. You may be seated.
The arc of the universe only tends towards justice through the efforts of committed people. Rights are not given, they are won. Let us commit ourselves to the continuing effort to expand justice and make this a better world for all. I invite you to bring close any chalice that you have lit so that we can extinguish the flame together. After our service has concluded, please join us in Beach Hall for conversation and reflection together, sans coffee, of course. This week's online coffee hour is hosted by JAM, our Justice Action Ministry. To get to our virtual coffee hour, click on the new link in this morning's email. It's different from last week's link. Now, please join me in speaking our vision statement as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of vision. As we go forth, let us heal and transform ourselves and our world through reason and love. Our chalice is extinguished. Please remain seated as Karen plays our postlude, and we look forward to seeing you at coffee hour afterwards.